I'm very excited to be here and honored to have the ministers here, former president, and to be here on this day. And this is our 70th birthday, and it's actually a very important day for Startup Nation, because a big reason I think we are Startup Nation is because Israel itself is a startup, and we're sort of celebrating that day. And when I mean a startup, actually, technically, that startups begin with an idea. And that idea usually sounds crazy to anybody who hears it. And the idea of Israel sounded, it was one of those very improbable ideas. And it takes a lot of drive and determination and willingness to take risk to turn that idea into a reality. So this is very much a part of Israel's story, and I want to thank you for being with us to celebrate that birthday today. So what I want to talk about is sort of the next stage in the innovation revolution. Change is happening very rapidly. It's coming at us very rapidly, and we need to start thinking about the future. But before that, I'll just say a few words about Startup Nation, why we call it Startup Nation. Israel, of course, has the highest venture capital per capita in the world. We have 6,000 startups where R&D is about 4.5% of GDP, which is, again, about the highest in the world. And, you know, this is why we've been seen as such an innovation center. But actually, going forward, startups are not enough. And this is the kind of difficult news for Israel, because we're a startup nation. But what we're seeing is, for a long time, Israel was number 2 pretty much after Silicon Valley. We had the biggest system outside of Silicon Valley. But now every country is producing startups. Cyprus certainly is. Everywhere I go to many countries. The book is now in 30 languages, which was a big surprise to us. And everybody wants to know how to become more innovative, but already every country is building startups. And some of these startup ecosystems are now bigger than ours, say in China, because we're such a small country. And this, of course, is an important thing we share with Cyprus, and I think an asset to innovation. So when I say startups are not enough, the reason is that change is accelerating. You know, we think things are changing quickly because 10 years ago, none of us had smartphones. Most of the things we use today and we think about, we couldn't have done 10 years ago. But the next 10 years are going to go even faster. And we have to think about the big things that are going to change and how we can actually take advantage of this tremendous rate of change. So I want to talk about 3 of them. There are many things that are coming at us in the future: artificial intelligence, food, energy, many different things. But I want to focus on 3 things that I think are so important to us in our daily lives. We get up in the morning, we go to school, we go to work. These are the things, some of the big things that are important, and if they change our lives. The first is health, the second, education, and the third is cities. And the important word here is reinventing. I don't mean a small difference. I mean a completely different way of doing things that's much better. So it's very interesting to see what this might look like. So I'll start with health. So what is the problem we're trying to deal with in the health system, in medicine? The problem is this. These are all the causes of premature death. These are figures from the UK, but they're similar in many countries. And as you can see, the first 5 are responsible for over 80% of the problem. Things like heart disease, cancer, respiratory, digestive, nervous system, these chronic disorders. And we're been making progress against all of them, but there's still a huge problem. We're not doing enough, and we all know from our own personal experience, from our own lives, from our families, that there's just too much that we haven't yet figured out how to solve. So let's start with how health works today. Take any one of those conditions. At some point, they're not in our bodies. They're at 0. And they start progressing. And we want to prevent them from getting to 100. And the problem is that the way it works now is, when does the health system start? When do we start dealing with it? We start when we go to the doctor when we feel bad. And the doctor gives us all these tests. And then maybe the tests show that we have stage 4 cancer or something like that. Many of these conditions, you don't even have that much time. And that's because our way of detecting the problem is just our own discomfort. So the whole health system is trying to work there at the end, too often, at the end of the problem, where it's so hard, not very successful, and very expensive. So it's very clear that if we could move the whole health system to the beginning, if we could detect these things much earlier, all of these problems are much easier to solve. You don't have to cure cancer if you can catch it when it's so tiny that you just take it out. It hasn't spread anywhere. And this is true of pretty much all these conditions. We can save all those millions of lives if only we could detect these things earlier. So how can we do that? How can we move to this kind of utopian world of health? We're missing 2 big things. The first is biomarkers. In other words, right now our biomarker is when we feel bad. That's our sign that we have a problem. We need better signs than that. We need signs, that's what a biomarker is. We need a sign that much earlier, before we feel anything, tells us we have a problem. But the other thing we need is sensors, because without a sensor, how do we know the biomarker is there? You know, we're not taking blood tests all the time. So we need sensors to find the biomarkers. And that's why I predict that if we meet again in 10 years, maybe in 5 years, that all of us are going to have some kind of sensors that are measuring lots of things going on in our body all the time. And I know that sounds a little creepy right now. You know, why would healthy people start wearing sensors? But what's going to happen is, when we look back at this time, at 2018, we're going to think, how did we live like that? How did we walk around with no idea what was going on inside our bodies? That's going to seem very scary and reckless and horrifying. Just as now it seems very strange to have sensors. And the reason we're going to do this is because the sensors give us the data that are going to help us find the biomarkers. Now, this sounds a little tricky, but let me explain using an example of how data saves lives. So this is a premature baby. And this story is in a neonatal intensive care unit, which is where premature babies are, in a hospital in Toronto called the Hospital for Sick Children. And a new administrator came in. She came in from the world of advertising, where they're using big data all the time to predict what you're going to buy, what you want. And she said, well, you know, look at all these tiny babies. They're all hooked up to all kinds of monitors all the time, heart rate, oxygen, and there are all these bells going off, and the doctors and the nurses run around turning the machines, you know, turning the alarms off. But no one's collected the data from all these babies. And she said, okay, what if we collected, what are we going to find out? And the doctors told her that one problem they had was infections, that 5% of the babies died from infection. If only we could find a way to catch that sooner. And sure enough, they looked in the data and they found that when the baby's heart rate went stable, which you might think was a good thing, it was actually a sign of infection. And so 24 hours before they had any sign. So the doctors could start the antibiotics a day earlier and save a lot of lives. And this just came out of the data. So, and I'll just give you a very interesting example from Israel of a very exciting, I think, sensor, because we don't even have to wear it. It's called a vocal biomarker. It turns out our voice has clues to our health. And if you can see, this graph actually not hard to interpret. The green line is a normal voice. The red line is someone with cardiovascular disease, which is the biggest killer on that chart. And you can see there's a huge difference between the normal voice and the voice with heart disease. So just by taking a sample of your voice, we can diagnose these things. And this is very exciting and just shows that what you can do with data and how we can move to a much different and better kind of health. So there we go. Sorry. Okay, we're talking about reinventing education. Now, again, we'll start with the problem of education, which is, here's the short history. Basically, when everyone was a farmer, we didn't need much education. Maybe none. You could be a great farmer without going to get much schooling. But then the Industrial Revolution came. We were working in factories. We needed more education. In the United States, they did the high school revolution. People suddenly had to graduate from high school. And actually, that revolution, which was earlier, much earlier than what happened in Europe, I think is a big explanation to why the United States is what it is today. But then the world got more complicated. Suddenly we're in the knowledge age, the information age, we're in offices, and suddenly we need university degrees. But if you got a university degree some years ago, you were set. You would get hired, you would be pretty sure that you would get a job and do fine. But now a university degree, I'm sorry to say, isn't a guarantee of much anymore. Many more people are getting them, and even worse, the companies that are trying to hire people aren't finding what they're looking for among the university graduates. They're looking for other things. What are those kind of things that they're looking for that they're not getting even from people who go through university? So here's the problem, as expressed by somebody you might know. He's the head of education for the OECD for Europe. He says something simple. The world economy doesn't hire you for what you know. Google knows everything. It hires you for what you can do with what you know. And this is what we're not learning in education today, how to do things with what we know. It's not designed that way. So what we're missing is a lot of what's called 21st century skills. We needed them all along, but just now we're deciding we need them. Things like this: curiosity, courage, emotional intelligence, how to communicate, resilience. These are things there's no curriculum for in school. There's no class. There's no test. But these are the kind of things that companies are looking for. It's the kind of things we need to do anything in life, not just for a job. And the question is how to get them. And there's an interesting thing that goes directly back to the Startup Nation story. Israel has actually been managing to get these things more than most countries. It's a big part of our secret, but it's not in the education system. And people who come to Israel looking for the secret, they may go visit our schools, but they won't find it there. Our schools are not that different than than anywhere else. But we have this track, I sort of call it a leadership track, outside of the education system that starts with scouting when kids are fourth grade, goes through when they graduate, then now lately there are these gap year programs, and it culminates in the military service. And I want to start by saying, don't try this at home. This is a very unique thing about Israel. It doesn't apply to anyone else. But in our military, young people are getting tremendous amounts of responsibility and challenges. And they're learning how to work together in teams. They're learning how to sacrifice for things that are larger than themselves. They're getting a lot of these things because that's what the military needs them to do. They give them the training, but what they really care about is this ability to get stuff done. So I think that the future of education is to move more towards challenges. Now, it's very hard to make challenges in school as real as they are in the Israeli military. That's not possible and not a good idea. But we can bring real challenges to education that force us to work in groups, that force us to solve problems. And we actually will get more knowledge when we do this. Because in order to solve these problems, we have to teach ourselves. So we'll do a better job both with the knowledge and what to do with the knowledge. So let's talk about cities. And in the other cases, the other two cases, it wasn't obvious what the problem was. In this case, the problem is obvious. I think we all know the problem with cities that's just getting worse all the time. It's called traffic. Now, actually, I'm going to China tomorrow. And when I show this to Chinese audiences, they say, oh, yeah, I know that one. This is in China. But it could be, anywhere. It's a rich country problem. It's a poor country problem. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. Most things are getting better in terms of technology. This one is getting worse. So we're desperate to solve this problem. And we think maybe the solution is driverless cars. There's a lot of excitement around driverless cars. They're very, it's a very impressive accomplishment of computer vision, of artificial intelligence. Israel's biggest success story in terms of exit is in this driverless car field. Mobileye was sold to Intel. Really the most advanced company, I think, in driverless cars. And this is going to happen. And driverless cars are better than cars with drivers. But the problem is they're not going to solve traffic. And this is a guy who is actually building driverless cars, Elon Musk. And he says, if cars are more available, if they're cheaper, then we're going to use them more. And if we're going to use them more, it's actually going to make traffic worse. So it's all good, but it's not the solution to traffic. So what is? So to understand what is the heart of the problem with traffic, the heart is gridlock. The heart is that no matter what you do, whether you have driverless cars or whatever, you have intersections. And those intersections are going to get clogged up. And so we need a system that solves that problem, that takes a two-dimensional network and turns it into a three-dimensional network. So I want to show you a 2-minute video because it's very hard to explain this thing without seeing it. And then I'll explain some more.
The city. It's where we live, love, and create. Yet as life moves faster and faster, we move slower and slower. Traffic is just getting worse, and driverless cars won't save us, because the problem is not the driver, it's the car. It's been a century, and it is time to move on. SkyTram, is the first public transit system that's as personal as a car. It will unclog our cities and transform our lives. With SkyTran, there's no schedule. Its predictive artificial intelligence knows when you need your ride. Stations are so narrow they can fit over sidewalks, so they are always just a short walk away. SkyTran's revolutionary magnetic levitation technology enables you to fly on a cushion of air. Traveling in a skypod is so quiet and smooth that you can comfortably work or just simply relax.
So I've prepared a presentation.
Skypods don't need to pick up or drop off other passengers, so there are absolutely no stops on the way to your destination. In the city, Skypods can fly over busy streets at 50 miles an hour and speed up to 200 miles an hour between cities. With some stations built directly into office buildings, a 2-hour commute can be reduced to 20 minutes. SkyTran's low cost and simple construction allows for many more lines than conventional public transport systems, which in turn allows for greater capacity. Per mile, SkyTran is 1/10 the cost of light rail and 1/100th the cost of a subway. With its speed and high capacity, SkyTran can bring an end to traffic. A dream come true. The next step will be something we've never even dreamed of. Transforming streets into parks, cafes, and markets. Without cars, we can breathe, create, and wander. After 100 years, it's time for a change.
So this is, yes. I'm sorry, I may have ruined you for traffic, because anyone who sees this and is in a traffic jam says, I can't wait. I can't wait for something like this. Let's see, how do we go to the next slide? There we go. So the first question that people have about this is capacity. How can these tiny vehicles, it looks like a joke, how can these tiny vehicles carry millions of people and replace many of the cars that we're using today? The surprising thing is that one of those lines of SkyTran can carry as many vehicles as 3 lanes of highway. So that thin line is equal to those 3 lanes. That's a lot of capacity, and if you actually create a grid of this, then that grid has tremendous capacity. Another thing to understand here is we saw the problem was gridlock. So this system is a 3-dimensional system. Everywhere where the lines cross, they don't interfere with each other. Here you see 2 lines crossing, and the vehicles can just go through. But if you want to change lines, you just get off on you can see here there's a little thing going off and then getting back up on the next line. So you have the best of both worlds. You can change lines anytime you want, and you can go right through. So there's no gridlock. So this is how it works today. Let's say you're taking, you want to get from there to there, and you're taking a bus or a train. So you'd take a train, say stop, stop, stop. You get to the end, you get off, you wait for another one, you keep stopping, change again, and that's how we do it today. With a system like this, you just go straight through. You don't have to stop when you're changing lines. You don't have to stop anywhere along the way. You're the only one in the vehicle, so nobody else has to get off or get on. You get on where you are. You get off where you're going without stopping, without a schedule, and that's it. And that's why this can replace cars, because the reason we love our cars is we get on where we are. We don't have a schedule. We're in our private space. We go where we're going without stopping. And we get there, we go right there. Now, for that luxury, we're willing to tolerate parking, and traffic. But this gives you all those benefits without the parking and traffic, so I think that this could actually be the first public transportation system that could get us out of our cars. So all this is very exciting, I think. Next, please. Thank you. So solving traffic is enormous. It is a dream. But if I could be more excited about something, it's that what it will do to our cities. We can reinvent our cities. Our cities are built around cars right now. When you think about, the cities of 100 years ago when horses were going around, the actual structure of the city hasn't changed much. It's still built around those same roads. But imagine that our transportation system didn't have to be on the ground. That means we can free up the ground for living, for biking, for walking, for cafes, for whatever we want, for parks. Now, I'm not saying we'll get rid of all the streets, but we'll be able to pedestrianize huge parts of our cities. And this is a dream. If you look at cities all over the world, they're trying to pedestrianize little pieces, but they can't do it because there's no other way to get there. But with this kind of system, we basically take the transportation thing off the ground. We get to use the ground ourselves. And so this actually solves what I call the visual pollution problem, where people see this and they say, oh, I don't want this flying around my face. The way to understand it is it doesn't add ugliness, it removes ugliness. The real ugliness is the cars and the pollution and the noise and all of that. If you can remove a lot of that, you're making the city so much more livable. So this is actually, there's an Israeli connection. It's an American company, but the test track, the first test track is actually at the airport in Israel, because a company called Israel Aerospace Industries is working together with the American company on this. And there are a number of cities that are now looking at this system, which I think the first ones will be built probably in 2021, small pilot systems. But it could be the next, people will stop building light rail lines that take 5 years and tear up the city and don't solve traffic. And instead, we're going to start seeing more of these kind of systems. So this is my conclusion. This is why I think that Cyprus and Israel and pretty much every country is in the same boat now in terms of who are going to be the next innovation leaders of the world. Startups are going to help, and the countries that are able to reinvent big things will have more startups, will have more of an innovation system. But basically, these kind of changes, and maybe I'm wrong about some of them, but this scale of change is going to happen across the world. But it's not going to happen at the same time. Some countries are going to be first. And the countries that are first, I believe, will be seen as the innovation leaders going forward. So I think this is a very exciting opportunity for any country. And I want to thank you, and I really love to take some questions with whatever time we have. Thank you. What's the... how much time do we have for questions? Yeah. Okay. You want to?
It's time for questions now. If you want to ask Mr. Singer any questions, please go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, you. Yeah. Yes.
I would like to congratulate you for your wonderful speech, but I would also like to point out that the reinventing of education started in Israel in 1945, when Feinstein was the first to introduce new methods in schools when the shipments of small children that were in concentration camps were entering the country. And I would just like to mention that.
Sure, that's important. Forrestine was an amazing educator, one of the pioneers in terms of rethinking education. And in fact, you could go back to John Dewey 100 years ago, an educational philosopher. You know, the funny and sad thing is that people have been saying the right things about education for about a century and talking about what's wrong. But the problem is that these alternative schools, like the kind of schools that Forrestine was working on, they never became mainstream. They always stayed alternative because, as one friend of mine put it, the system put out its antibodies and protected itself against a major change. So there are tremendous educational innovations out there. The question is, how can we get the mainstream to change? Yeah. Didn't quite hear, but it's about the early stages of Israel or Cyprus? Yes.
Cyprus is at the very early stages of startups. So from your experience, what would you advise a country like Cyprus to focus on to enhance its innovation or startup ecosystem? So
there's a kind of simple idea that has come out of the people who have studied startups, who rank different cities around the world in terms of the health or importance of their ecosystems. There's one called Startup Genome. There's others. But if you look there, one of the big things they look at is connectivity. They know that, according to the research, that the systems that are more connected to other systems are going to grow faster. And it makes sense. I mean, of course, a country that tries to do everything itself is not going to grow as much as a country that is actively connecting itself with other ecosystems. And I think this is especially true in Europe, where you have all these countries close together, everyone trying to build their own system and not doing such a good job of connecting. And then you have this really big mature system, Israel, that's sitting right there. In particular with Cyprus, you could almost swim there. It's so close. It's a shame not to take advantage of it. It's like having a kind of a Silicon Valley right next to you. And so I think it's actually very good both for Israel and for Cyprus. I think Israel needs to connect more with other countries besides the United States. We're very connected to the United States. We need to innovate with people from other countries because, for instance, look at Skype. Skype had 7 founders from 4 countries. Companies that have founders from different countries, I think, are stronger. When I see a company with key people from different countries, I think, yeah, this one probably has a better chance because what they're doing is they're combining the strengths of different countries. And each country has its own strengths. Cyprus's innovation story is going to be different than the United States or Israel or UK or Sweden. Everybody's got their own story based on their own strengths. The trick is combining them. And so my advice would be to make that happen, to get the entrepreneurs to meet each other, to try to get Israeli startups here, to take Cypriot startups and apply to Israeli accelerators and spend a few months there. This kind of interaction is the key.
Yes. Could you please elaborate on your comment regarding autonomous cars, that they will not solve the traffic problem? Because autonomous cars, nowadays, families own 4, 5, 6 cars per, home. And in the case of autonomous cars, 5 or 6 families will be able to share a car.
Well, there are actually interesting schemes for how driverless cars could solve the problem. The most hopeful, I think, is the idea of kicking the cars out of a small part, the center of the city, and have that be driverless only, and keep expanding that and have kind of HOV lanes that are driverless only going into it. I think that actually could be a solution for some cities. I think it will take too long. I think that it's also inferior because we keep giving the ground to the cars. I think we should have that space. And so while you may be able to eventually solve traffic with driverless cars, I think the cities that do it this way would be better off. But I just don't think the driverless car solution is coming fast enough. I mean, we're seeing how, Uber or Tesla, there's one accident and everybody said, okay, we don't want to do this anymore.
Hi. I wanted to listen to your ideas about reinventing education, because that's really a very important thing for the future. And those 10 qualities that you put on your slides about what is needed, I mean, the children need creativity, they need to be out of the box, they need leadership, they need teamwork, and it seems to be the skills that everybody will need to go out there in and seek a job in the future. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, we don't have this embedded in the curriculum. But how do we go about doing it? I mean, do we need the state, along with innovators, to go back to the schools, scrap the curriculum, and create a new one? Do we need to change the hours of the school? What is it, in your opinion and in your research, that we need to do?
So I'm kind of radical about this. I don't want to... I think we need to re-examine what education is about, what we're trying to do, but also completely how we do it in terms of classrooms and teachers and grades and tests and alarm bells and the whole kind of way that education works now, which I think rightly a number of people have pointed out is essentially a model that was created for the Industrial Revolution, a model that was created to teach people some basic things, but basically have them be obedient and to work in the factory. Or actually, one analysis I saw was that it was it was the technology of the British Empire. There were no computers then, but they needed to create people who were interchangeable, who they could send anywhere in the world to run the empire. But the world's not like that anymore. And I think, though, that the hardest shift to do in our minds is, how can anyone say that education is not about knowledge? Now, I'm not saying it's not about knowledge, but it's not just about knowledge. And in fact, maybe we actually have to make it focus on those 10 things. You can make a list of 20 things. But those things that are beyond knowledge, let's say. And I think if we do that, we'll do a better job at getting the knowledge part. But first we have to have in our minds what we're trying to do, that we're trying to get these life skills, soft skills, 21st century skills. And once we set that as a goal, then we think, okay, how can we get there? And I think probably the way to get there is through things that require you to work in groups. And once you're working in group, you have to have emotional intelligence. You have to be able to communicate. You have a lot of these things you need and you can develop by working together with other people solving problems. And so I like to talk about challenge-based learning. There's a famous term called project-based learning. I think even better is challenge-based learning. But there's room. I just also want to say it's fine to sit in the corner and read a book. You don't have to do challenges all the time. But I think the challenges are a big part of the solution. Who's got the microphone? Okay.
Congratulations on your excellent presentation. My question has more to do with the actual innovation process and generating new innovations. By combining elements or factors from the 4 basic types of innovation, product, process, organizational, or marketing, we multiply the number of possible permutations and increase the probability of achieving innovative results. Is there a creative tool that can help organizations accomplish this combination of ideas from the 4 basic types of innovation?
Yeah, so the important thing about innovation is that people think that innovation is about ideas. And if you go to any conference on innovation, there'll be a big light bulb there. Because the light bulb is the symbol of the idea, and it's become the symbol of innovation. But if you talk to any entrepreneur, particularly one with some experience, they'll tell you that ideas aren't worth very much, because we've all got ideas. And in fact, I know when I meet a very new entrepreneur, they're often secretive about their idea, as if the idea is the important thing. If someone could take your idea and actually turn it into a great company, you would be lucky. You know, but the idea that someone can steal it, that's not how it works. The idea is just the beginning. It's what you add to it, that drive and determination and willingness to take risks. Those 2 big ingredients, which, by the way, were the 2 big ingredients we had to add to create Israel, the startup. So it's about how do you get more of those? And I think that the right way to think about it is not across a whole country. Every country, there are these weird people called entrepreneurs. They're very different than the people around them. A lot of places I go say, you know, well, here we don't like to take risk. Nowhere do people like to take risk. Even entrepreneurs don't like to take risk. They're willing to take risk. That's different. But you have a few people, strange people, who are willing to take risk, and they're the entrepreneurs. And what happens is they sort of create a cultural bubble. Silicon Valley, the culture of Silicon Valley and the attitude towards failure and risk are different than the rest of the United States. And every time you see a startup ecosystem, it's basically a cultural bubble within the country. And this is actually good news because it means we don't have to change the culture of our countries. In fact, we don't want to, and if we did, it's impossible. But what we can do is sort of help create a safe space where it's okay to be an entrepreneur. And the unusual thing about Israel is that the bubble sort of sits over the whole country because it is sort of the mainstream culture. But even in Israel, most people are not entrepreneurs.
I will totally agree. I will take the chance now to do the question because it's a big surprise asking so many questions in Cyprus. And now, I think, in my opinion, I don't think you only celebrate 70 years of innovation, but 3,000 years. I think you will be innovating since you're the first Hebrew people because you were always drive to survive in the hard times. And that's part of your history. And it's very good to know that taking this as a chance to, I think the problem in Cyprus, we can blame and claim everything, but accept the mindset that we have to change. And I think we should focus on changing the mindset. And instead of just having the talks and the words here, I think it will be nice you advise us how to take actions, changing the mindset, and then as taking from her questions, changing also or becoming part of our education and giving the chance to new generation. If the old generations are afraid to take the risk, let us take the risk and give us the chance to change that, because at least we are coming with a different mindset. And it's very good that we are very educated people here in Cyprus, but I think I will totally agree that we are afraid to take the risk, and it looks like it became as a part of our society to be afraid to take the risk. So that will be nice if you can tell us action. So thanks God we have the policy makers here in the house, and I think okay, fortunately or unfortunately, we didn't open the account for bringing the Eurovision, but I think we should open it for the startups nation and making our country proud, and we will have the full support, I believe, from Israel.
So actually an idea I talked about earlier in the day is to take the model of the trade mission. We all know what a trade mission is. It's when the political leader takes the CEOs and brings them to another country to meet the CEOs there. And that's a trade mission. It's great. They make deals and all that. We need to do innovation missions. We need to do the same thing for entrepreneurs and venture capital funds and accelerators and all the parts of the ecosystem, and just kind of encourage them to physically go meet people in another country doing what you're doing. And it's again what I'm talking about, connectivity. You can make it happen, or you can make it happen faster. And if any of you here are entrepreneurs, I really encourage you to visit Israel yourself. But also, you know, the government can help do this, to help make this happen. But it doesn't have to be the government. It could be universities. It can be corporates. Anybody who wants to, nonprofit organizations, that anyone who wants to promote and grow the ecosystem here can make this happen. And not just with Israel, also with other places in Europe, also with Silicon Valley. I mean, how else does anybody learn? And why would you want to rely just on the human capital that's here when you can tap into people all over the world? In fact, more and more I see startups that have founders in 4 countries that are all over the place. And I don't know how they found each other, but they did. Because why do they do this? Even though, you know, they're not in the same, it's difficult to, you know, languages, cultures. The reason they do it is because they're looking for the best people, and they also, I think, know that when you combine people from different countries, you're combining different strengths. And I think that the countries that have that mindset and really work on it can go faster. Who's got the microphone now?
I do. So
whoever has the mic wins.
Good evening, everyone. First things first, thank you for the very resourceful presentation, enhancing the vision of most of the participants here and giving us a heads up of the future, or how we should proceed towards the future. Now, my question is based a little bit on a reference from a book, The Human Use of Human Beings, from the 1950s, way before everything is what we actually know today. The scientists explained dystopian future, unfortunately, where the technology was devices gathering data, providing feedback from all humans and from individual to a collective. And then therefore putting us in a behavior box. And that's a fine line where the beautiful vision of technology becomes the dark side, where everyone is behaviorally modeled and they have to act a certain way, and the keys in the vision are out and we're off to the dark side. I would like your take to this.
So technological progress is not all good. I mean, there's, you know, I really think that the biggest challenge of the future is going to be meaning and not respect, but, you know, people talk about the future of work, about how computers and, you know, robots are going to take away everyone's jobs. I'm not sure it's exactly that way. I think what we've been worrying about this for hundreds of years, and each time what happens is we see the jobs that are going to be taken away, and we don't see the jobs that start appearing. But it's certainly happening much faster today. That's undeniable, which makes it a lot harder to adjust. So we're seeing all kinds of social consequences of technology. This business that we're always looking at our screens, we're addicted to our screens, and I feel guilty of this myself. It's causing real problems, and it could get worse. So usually, though, technology, you need technology to solve the problems that technology makes. And people will create companies and that'll be around this social problem, thinking of ways of dealing with it. Maybe companies, maybe organizations, but this is a huge challenge for us going forward. And you can make a long list of things, the downsides of technology, but we can't stop it. So we need to learn to live with it and to find the opportunities in it. And I think it starts by thinking about it and trying to imagine the future, because if you can imagine it, maybe you can lead in a better direction.
I think we'll take our last question, and then we can all go outside in the foyer where we can talk over drinks, and you may ask Mr. Singer anything you like. Just one last question, please.
If most nations and most corporations will be added, this innovation game, what, in your opinion, will be the most important factor that will separate the winners from the losers? Could it be, as you've said, the flexibility and adaptability to the fast-changing conditions in the future?
So what's happening in the biggest and best, most advanced companies is what they call open innovation, which means basically you don't have the best people in your company. The best people are always going to be outside your company, because you can't have all the best people in your company. So while Google and Apple, whatever, have billions of dollars to research and to innovate, even all those companies are in Israel, buying startups with the hundreds of big innovation centers. Basically, those innovation centers are composed often of the startups that they bought. And so what they're doing is essentially combining the strength of startups with the strength of big companies. Startups are great at innovation. It's very hard for them to grow. Big companies are great at growth. That's how they got to be big. But it's hard for them to innovate structurally. So this synergy between startups and corporates is very powerful, and that's why it's happening everywhere. And so, you can try to make your company more innovative, and there are many ideas of how to do that, but a big way that companies are doing it is simply to sort of import innovation, buy innovation, and even the most innovative companies are doing this. So, thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.